This is my Doctor Who X-Files crossover, co-written with Dad for the first 8 pages. It's called X Marks the Spot, or does it? You see, I don't know who I am, laughed Mulder. Can you imagine that? Well, try. There's no other way of explaining. No, it's got nothing to do with memory loss. I can remember things fine. I remember Mulder in my mind's eye. I can see him sitting here now doing the remembering. It's just that he's not me. Well, not all the time. Dr. Marcus Helmholtz referred to the file. I see this identity problem began soon after the accident. Problem? Again he laughed. What problem? If it's anyone's, it's yours. Here sits a void waiting to be filled. You've got my notes, so fill it, why don't you? Because you can't, at least not until you know what it's like. And the only sure way you're going to do that is by experiencing it yourself. I have, more than once. Usually it's in the early hours of the morning, especially after a bad night. I wake up dazed and with a thick head, and for a while I've lost all sense of who and where I am. It's rather frightening, so how you can laugh about it beats me. As I said, how are you going to know unless you try it? And I repeat, it's got nothing to do with memory. It's more like a kind of letting go. Let me be the doctor for once, okay? Okay. Right, take off your glasses, lean back, close your eyes and open your mind. Let me do the rest. Dr. Helmholtz conformed. Time passed as eventually did his sense of time. Then came brief glimpses of what it was like to remain fully awake and yet quickly to be replaced by a sense of insecurity, anxiety, anchorless, which eventually became so intense he opened his eyes. Hardly a laughing matter. The figure opposite broke the silence. Good, very good, and now you're wondering how I come to be so relaxed about it, right? But you see, as a result, I now know what I am, even though as yet I'm not sure who I am. Paradoxically, I've found my identity, only it's not what I thought it was. I'm not knowing who I am, all options are open. Such a release. No longer to be tied by those self-identifying thoughts is wonderful. Then why doesn't everybody seek this inner freedom, you may ask? Why don't we stop this self-identifying chatter and discover the many options available to us, rather than just the one we've been conditioned into believing? Okay, why? Because we can't, at least not under normal circumstances. Or perhaps we're afraid, like you were. Funny how often we learn how to think, but how rarely to stop, and so we're stuck with an affliction, one we don't realise we have because almost everyone else has it too, so we believe it's normal. An incessant mental noise which prevents us from finding out who we truly are, namely a timeless, spaceless being. I don't see, the doctor was confused. Mulder, or what he saw as Mulder, reached across and took his hand. Try a little harder. Join me, he smiled. And who knows? Who knows but that the thing that separates one person from another, perhaps one person from himself, is an illusion? Who knows, Doctor? Who? Helmholtz nervously withdrew his hand and, as if to break the tension, glanced towards the window. Just in front of the building opposite stood one of those old-fashioned police boxes. Strange it was still left standing, he thought, and returned his attention to the chair opposite. It was empty. No, no, no! Rose jumped with a start. What the heck's the matter? The doctor was staring wildly at the monitor inside the TARDIS, at the same time pressing various multicoloured buttons, whilst pulling on oddly shaped levers of all shapes and sizes. It's happened again, he yelled. But that's impossible! Rose crossed over to the monitor, trying to see what he was staring at, but all she witnessed was strange blue electrical interference lines all over the screen. What has? She asked nervously. The damn breach has reopened. The rift, the portal, whatever you want to call it, it's opened. She knew what he was referring to. In past travels aboard the Doctor's spaceship, a contraption known as the TARDIS, which stood for Time and Relative Dimension in Space, She had witnessed this unbelievable event more than once. The first time was the worst, when it took her away from this extraordinary time traveller, a man she'd grown to love. She'd ended up lost in another world with her ex-boyfriend, her mum, and a parallel version of her dad after fighting two of the Doctor's intergalactic enemies, namely the Daleks and the Cybermen. Then amazing circumstances had brought everyone together for yet another major war with the Daleks, but it had once again resulted in her being left back in a parallel Norway. Dalek Ulv Stranden, Bad Wolf Bay. This time she'd been left with the Doctor, only it wasn't her Doctor, even if every atom was identical in every possible way. She'd tried to make the best of it, but it wasn't him. She'd convinced herself of that. Then another miracle had occurred. The TARDIS had somehow fallen through into her dimension, even though time and again he'd said it was completely impossible. They had been reunited, and here she was, his travelling companion once more. "Don't mess with destiny," she'd said to him, while he just stood there open-mouthed as they left Bad Wolf Bay behind forever. Well, for now at least. During their travels through time and space, he'd explained to her that since saying goodbye to Martha Jones and then Donna Noble, he had remained alone. Part of her was very happy to hear that, but the rest of her felt for this lonely traveller. Now here she was, back in the TARDIS. Don't mess with destiny. She'd probably have those words etched on her headstone one day. Remember me telling you how every decision we make creates a parallel dimension, and how crossing from one parallel world to the next rips holes in the universe, creating a dangerous imbalance of reality. The result will very possibly amount to existence being sucked back into the void, the space in between all dimensions. Non-space, dead space, no up or down, in or out. Rose cut him off, adding, "No space or time, you called it the howling, or hell." "Nothing, Rose," he yelled. "Everything will be nothing." "But you said you'd managed to close the breach for the final time," she questioned. "You said it was over." "What do I know?" he told her, flashing her a smile. But she saw what lay beneath that exterior. Over time she'd started to learn to read into his hidden emotions, even though he tried with expertise to cover them. The Doctor strode over to the door and opened it, then faced her and smiled. "Well, we seem to be in Oxford, England." His face frowned. "Of course this could be a parallel Oxford. If we've managed to defy the rule book of the Time Lords yet again, then we could have done the impossible once more." Rose smiled. "At least it's not Norway." Then she joined him and they stepped out of the TARDIS. Across the way, in plain view of the traveller and his companion, a tall figure watched their every move. He knew they would not be able to see him as they weren't yet tuned in. That was as good a word as any to describe the situation. Agent Fox Mulder smiled to himself. He'd done a lot of internet research on this Doctor, and now here he was. What were the odds? He'd been secretly searching whilst on X-File cases with his partner Dana Scully, though he'd kept this from her. She most likely would have tried to find a logical explanation anyway, but what he had discovered was far from rational. Also, why he'd tried to explain part of his discovery to an old university professor from his days as a student in this city, he couldn't quite understand. Come to think of it, how'd he ended up in Oxford in England after all these years? One thing pervaded his mind, though, the void ship. It was something to do with that void ship. He'd come across another UFO sighting while he and Scully had been investigating a case in Virginia, USA. But it hadn't just been any old flying saucer hovering in those woods. He wasn't even sure it had belonged to the Greys. It had felt like there had been no words to describe it right there and then, and somehow he ended up inside it. Fear had gripped him at first until that wore off and was replaced with nothing. Then there was no need to fear or even feel anything at all. Everything became nothing, and since that had become clear, he'd understood everything.